This lovely 1965 230 SL has got a gearbox problem. Basically the problem is that when the car's cold it doesn't want to get into gear, and when you're driving along and the engine's not warmed up it's tending to jump and slip out of gear and not change smoothly. And the problem is there's just not enough oil in the gearbox. When you check the oil on the automatic gearbox, the engine must be running and it must be at temperature. Don't make the mistake of checking the oil when the car's cold. Let's have a look underneath and see what we're dealing with. Whoa, 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 whoa. Looks like we're dealing with multiple oil leaks. This is the gearbox pan here. It's difficult to see where it's leaking. This is basically held on by a series of bolts, and between there the transmission is a cork gasket. So I think the next step is to get onto Mercedes. You can actually buy automatic gearbox kits. They're about £60 plus VAT, and they'll come with that gasket, the filter that's inside. So next morning, we cleaned all of this up yesterday. I've come back today to see if it's obvious where the gearbox oil is leaking from, and I think probably one candidate is this seal in here. When the kit comes from Mercedes, I suspect there'll be some kind of aluminium or copper washer in there to seal that up. The other place that looks likely is the actual sump bolt itself here. It looks to have seepage as well. The first thing I'm going to do is drain out the gearbox oil, find out how much is in there. Well, that's a bit of a surprise. I came to undo this sump bolt here, and often these are rusted solid and tight as you like, but this one, check this out. This one's actually finger tight. No wonder the gearbox oil is leaking out of there. The colour of the oil doesn't look too bad, but let's see if any bits came out into the oil. This is the dipstick pipe here, the gearbox dipstick pipe, and in theory you should just be able to undo that bolt there with a, what is it, a 27mm spanner. But the problem is, I suspect you're going to need 2 spanners, because when you get a spanner on there like so, I think you're going to need a second spanner here, because that there feels like the whole thing wants to shear off. Rather than try and getting the gearbox dipstick fitting off, I've actually just unbolted it at the top, so when this pan comes off, which it hopefully will, I'm just going to take the whole thing off in one go and take a closer look at that fitting to see what's going on there. I don't want to risk shearing it and opening up a whole different can of worms. So I've unbolted it through the engine bay at the top, and I'm just going to take these 16 bolts out now. Pan bolts are all coming off rather easily, or they're all getting loose rather easily, which is wonderful. Sometimes they're rusted solid, you'll end up snapping them, getting them off, but to actually get to that bolt there, and in fact to get the pan off, you're going to have to take this pipe off, which I believe leads to the oil cooler. So I'm going to take that off, see if it gives me enough movement, and if not, I'm going to take the whole pipe off. This bolt off, and what you can see is this quite a bit of oil still inside the oil cooler, so make sure you've got a pan or something underneath to catch all of that. I'm going to loosen it off a little bit more and just leave it to drain. Got the oil, the gearbox oil pan out. You can see that the old cork gasket is just hard, just basically disintegrated when we took it off. So in the kit from Mercedes we'll get a new one of those. You can also see how much gunk is in there, just in the bottom of the pan. Look at that. Gosh, doesn't look good, does it? So we're going to give that a proper clean out. Yeah, it's held on by one bolt here, but whatever you do, don't make the mistake that I did. When you undo that, a shed load of oil is going to come tumbling down all over your garage floor. So make sure you've got a container underneath before you undo that oil filter from the gearbox. You can see It's got quite a lot of sludge on it. Now the filter's actually doing its job. The parts to arrive, I'm just going to take this pan, just clean it up a bit, just using one of these things here from Eastman. They're very good for getting around corners and stuff like that, and also just a standard wire wheel on a battery operated drill. What we're going to do is just going to clean up all of these surfaces here, so where the gasket sits there's no oil and grease, and then similarly here, just all of these surfaces here where the bolts go in, just make sure they're nice and clean. So we're just going to clean this up and then we're going to spray it, prime it and then spray it. And the parts have arrived. While I've been waiting for the parts to arrive, I have sanded this down just using some of these wire wheels. You can pick these up from Amazon. A Marksman 3-piece wire cup set for about £2.50, £2.60. You want to sand all the loose rust off anything cylindrical, this shape of wire brush is the best, and you can only get them, at least I've only ever found them at this company here, Eastwood. You can get them from a company called Frost. You can also get this rust encapsulator from Frost. It costs about £24–25 a can. It's not cheap, but the benefit is it'll stop any rust and also work as a primer and a top coat if you want it to. So I'm actually going to leave the pan and the dipstick in this matte black finish. Nice when you do spray them up, make sure that you don't get paint on the inside of the pan. Just mask around there. And similarly, when you're spraying the end of this fitting here, just make sure you mask around to that ring there so that you don't get any paint on the inside. The parts have arrived today. A gasket, sorry, a gearbox set for a Mercedes. It costs £60 plus VAT, which is £72.60. That's the part number there. Anyway, what do you get? You get the actual filter itself. You obviously get the cork gasket, which you'll need, and then mysteriously you get 4 aluminium crush washers. Now, why you get 4, I'm not quite sure. I haven't worked that out yet. Oil filter on, it's just held on by 1 bolt. I've bent these fins slightly back into position. This filter actually only goes on one way. And once again, when you're tightening this up, you don't need to over tighten this. What you do is actually put this fitting here into the oil pan and tighten it up, and then we're going to put this oil pan on. The kit comes with 3 aluminium crush washers, so we're going to use one of those. When you do put this in, make sure you put it in the right hole. Okay, the big side of this oil pan goes towards the front of the car. Okay, with a 24mm socket or a spanner. Once again, you don't need to over tighten it, let the washers do the work. Cork gasket, and there's great debate on whether or not you should stick these gaskets down to the actual pan. I'm not going to do it. If you want, you can use spray-on adhesive just to keep that in place and put the bolts upside down overnight so that it's less fiddly, but I'm confident that I can get it on without having to do that. By the 4 corner bolts, and what I'm going to do is just start the threads on each of the other bolts. Once again, just do them finger tight first. Make sure you're not going to cross the threads. Tightened all the bolts down by hand, and now I'm going to start tightening this one first, then that one, then that one, then that one in a cross pattern. I'm going to go around once again in a just clockwise pattern and give each one a little twist just to tighten them slightly. I would say the hardest part of this whole job is getting this dipstick pipe back in place. You've got to thread it up from the bottom of the car, avoiding all of the pipes, and then try and attach it with the bolt at the top. Okay, the other thing you've got to do when you're changing oil, at least you're supposed to do when you're changing your oil, is to drain the oil out of the torque converter. So you take the metal plate off here, it's just held on by 2 bolts, and then you're supposed to turn the engine until you get to the drain plug. The other way of doing it, which is what I'm going to attempt to do, is a very bad method, but I'm going to try it anyway. It's just to get a flat blade screwdriver and just turn the torque converter like that. The danger is you end up snapping off one of these fins. So the safer way to do is actually get a socket. I think it's a 27mm socket on the front of the engine, but I can't access that at the moment. Turn the torque converter until you see the drain plug, which is here. All we have to do is figure out how to undo that. I think it's an Allen key. And make sure you've got something underneath to catch the oil as it comes out. If only that bolt was in tight. In the end, we got it with an Allen key and just using a spanner on the end of it to give extra leverage. So I think we've got it loose now. The actual oil in this car looks pretty good. Trying to get that bolt out, it might be super tight, so make sure you've got exactly the right size Allen key. 6mm is what you need. So one of the crush washers goes over the banjo bolt on that side of the banjo, and then you're gonna thread the banjo bolt through, and I can't do this whilst holding a phone. You're gonna put the other washer on that side, putting this bolt in, so just be extra careful when you're doing it. Make sure definitely that they've got the bolt in properly and you're not going to cross the threads. Take this screw out holding this clamp here, don't forget to put it back in, but once again do not over tighten it. You're screwing into an aluminium there, you do not want to strip the thread. The oil has just arrived, and what you need for the gearbox, well at least what I'm going to put in it, is Castrol ATF Dex 2. It doesn't really matter what brand you put in. I always use Castrol because they're a recognised good quality brand, but you need Dex 2. And I've bought, rather than 5 litres in one thing, I've bought 5 single litres, which is slightly more expensive, but it is a lot easier to actually put in. And delivered, that came to £43.15, and that's from a company called OP Oils. Okay, when you come to fill up the gearbox oil, you're going to be filling through the dipstick. Whatever you do, make sure you get a funnel that fits really easily inside there, not one that just sits on top, but that sits easily on side. And what I do is I put a little bit of wire down there just to help it vent, so that will sit there quite snugly and it's not going to end up spilling oil everywhere when you fill it. So we're going to start in. When we emptied the oil out of the oil pan, we had about 1.5 litres. When we had another 1.5 litres come out of the torque converter. So I've put 2 litres in. I'm going to check it on the dipstick. I'm also going to leave it overnight and come back and check for leaks. Next morning, and I can see that we've got a leak here. That's going to need tightening up. We've also seemed to have a small leak here as well. So we're going to just give both of those a little twist to see if we can tighten them up. We added 2 litres last night. Found a few leaks this morning. Tighten those bolts up. What we're going to do is we're going to add 3 litres, get the engine hot, and then we're going to top it up to the right level. To page 69 of the 230 SL owner's manual, the distance between the lower mark on the dipstick and the upper mark on the dipstick is 1/2 litre. So when you fill to the lower mark with the engine running and hot, you need to add about another 1/2 litre. Not what you want. We've got another Exxon Valdez oil spill going on in the garage. That bolt is about as tight as I can get it, but it's still not sealing, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Undone the oil cooler bolt, taken the bolt out. The sealing rings are the wrong size for this bolt. Maybe they're just too big. The rings, which come in the transmission kit from Mercedes, are a bit of a mystery. What we do know is that one of the sealing rings is for this fitting here, one of the large ones. Another one of the large sealing rings is for this fitting here. We know that definitely this fitting here requires a small seal ring. If you put a large seal ring on there, oil will come pouring out. And I suspect in the torque converter also requires a small seal ring. So I think the kit should really have 3 small seal rings and 2 large ones. So if anyone out there can shed any light on where the seal rings in the Mercedes transmission kit should go, I'd be most interested. What I've done is I've put 2 small seal rings on this fitting here, 1 small seal ring on here, 1 large one, and 1 large one here. Those of you that are interested, the small seal rings are part number MN007 603 012100. As I say, the kit only comes with 1 of these, but I think you need 3 of them. So if I was doing this job again, I would order an additional 2 of these for the oil cooler pipe. Job done. Been for a test drive, topped the car up with about another 3/4 litre after driving it, engine hot, going through all the gears. The next thing for this car is to test and possibly change the fuel injectors, fix a small radiator leak, fix a small rear diff leak, and find out where the small oil leak is coming from.